welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 27, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. I have a lot to talk about this week, so this is going to be something of a variety episode. There isn't one common theme tying all of this together, so we're just going to go through. I have some listener questions. I have some thoughts on some recent YouTube videos that I've seen, some thoughts about what I've been working on, a class that I taught this week. Buckle up and we'll get started. Of course, the big news this week was that Joann Fabrics filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on Monday. I've been predicting this for a while, not because I'm any kind of oracle, but just because I've been keeping an eye on what's been going on at our local store and at the stores that I visit when I travel. My sense has been for quite a while, even before the pandemic, that Joann Fabrics was in a bit of trouble. And I think all of those birds came home to roost. I'm going to recommend that if you want a good, thorough discussion of all of the backstory and all of the information about the private equity firm that currently owns Joann Fabrics and where they might be going in the future, check out a channel on YouTube called Sewing Report Live. The content creator of that channel, named Jen, has done a fabulous job of doing a lot of excellent, accurate research to get the whole picture. And that's the channel that I go to when I want information about what's going on with Joann Fabrics. I'll give you my opinion, and remember, it's just my opinion, and it's the opinion of someone who lives in a rural area with a small Joann Fabrics store. We also have a Hobby Lobby here, and we have a couple of small independent quilt stores. Joann Fabrics has been here since I moved here, since before I moved here. They used to be at our what we call our old mall, and then they moved to the other side of town, to the side of town nearest to me, into their own building. I got to know the manager. Her name was Deb. She was very friendly. I got to know a lot of the ladies at the cutting table. There was a lady there named Nancy who was a lot of fun. These were all people that I saw in my day-to-day life and saw them when I went to Joann Fabrics. I can remember when our Joann Fabrics had quite an extensive apparel fabric section. And over the years, that gave way to more and more quilting fabric. And then the quilting fabric gave way to more and more flannel. And the flannel was joined by fleece. And there were some Thanksgiving, Black Friday sales the day after Thanksgiving when I remember one particular year my older daughter wanted to make something for her college boyfriend. And we ended up dropping her off at the Joann Fabrics and going to another store and coming back about 2 hours later, and she was still in line at the cutting table. So I remember those days when they didn't spread their Black Friday sales out like they do now, and our store was just mobbed. Since the pandemic, things have gone downhill. During the pandemic, our local store shortened its hours, as did a lot of stores. But even after the pandemic, they never went back to their regular hours. And for a while, in the past year or so, our store has only been open from 11 to 5, 7 days a week. And if you do the math, that's 6 hours, 7 days a week. That's 42 hours. Plus, I would imagine some hours maybe on either end for stocking or unloading the truck or other things. That really isn't enough to provide a full-time job to anyone. And I started to see a lot of turnaround and turnover of the staff. So people would work there and they'd work there for a couple of weeks and they'd disappear. Or they'd work for a couple of months and they'd disappear. And so There was a lot of staff turnover, a lot of churn. Our store stopped carrying a lot of apparel fabric. It started to look like a glorified dollar store. There was a lot of cheap plastic stuff being sold, and going in there to find basic sewing supplies became more and more difficult. So I had a sense that something was coming down the pike, and it did. I hope that Joann Fabrics can pull itself out of this death spiral, but I'm not optimistic. I feel bad for the people who worked there. Deb, who was our manager, I haven't seen her in several months. I wouldn't be surprised if she took early retirement or went and got a different job. I haven't seen her around town. The whole thing is really sad, and I guess that we're lucky that we have a Hobby Lobby, and Missoula just got a Hobby Lobby as well. I will still have a local store where I can get basic sewing notions, but if our Joann Fabrics store closes, I think that's going to be a loss. I know that Joann Corporate has said that they aren't planning to close any stores, and I know that they said that they were going to try and exit Chapter 11 within a month, which I think is kind of ridiculously ambitious. We'll see if they can do it. I was in our local store yesterday, and shelves are empty. Stock is obviously not being replenished. I only saw 2 employees. The whole mood of the store was very sad and depressed. I know that some of my listeners are not fans of big box stores, and that's fine. And this indeed may end up being an opportunity for our local stores to pick up the slack and step in and start carrying some of the apparel fabrics that Joann's used to carry, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's going to happen in the current economic climate, but we'll find out. The other piece of drama, I hate to call it a piece of drama, but it kind of is. I had a class on Wednesday at the quilt store. I was teaching the Natalie Cowell pattern, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but I happened to be flipping through my YouTube feed, and a video about Sew Expo popped up, Sew Expo 2024. So I watched it, and I am not going to put links to this in the show notes because I don't want to tell tales out of school. I think it's important to talk about this, but I don't think it's necessary to name names. If you are interested in what's going on, you can Google it. You can go to YouTube and do a search, and I'm sure it will pop up. There were 2 women in a class at Sew Expo. Both of these women have YouTube channels. And it just so happens that I was walking from the parking lot into the fairgrounds behind both of them one day. And I know this only because one of the women was wearing an absolutely gorgeous tweed coat that she had made. And I tapped her on the shoulder and I asked her if she had made it. I assumed that she had made it, and she confirmed that yes, she had. And so I told her how nice it looked. Then I was a bit surprised to see these women on this YouTube video talking about one of the classes that they took at Sew Expo. So they took a pants fitting class, and apparently the instructor was a bit abrasive and a bit inappropriate in the way that she handled some of the parts of the class. Specifically, when you're doing a fitting class, and this is why I'm going to talk about this because it has to do with the class that I taught on Wednesday. When you're teaching a fitting class, you are getting up close and personal with people's space, and some people are okay with that and some people aren't. I've had enough medical procedures in my life that I really don't care anymore. People get up in my business when I am in some kind of a medical situation, and I've given up worrying about it. It happens. But I know for some people that is different. They may have some trauma in their background. They may have some reason why they don't want somebody to be close to them or touching them, especially a stranger. And I think it's up to all of us to respect that. So that was the complaint that these 2 women were making about the instructor, in this class that they had taken at Sew Expo. And as it happens, I took a class from this same instructor last year at Sew Expo, and I had some criticisms of her myself just from a teacher who was actually being a student in her class. I thought that some of the comments that she made and some of her behavior was not appropriate in a professional setting. So I'm inclined to believe these two women when they said that they also experienced something similar. So I went to my class on Wednesday, and having this in my head, I had a couple of students, and one of the first things that we do before we start a pattern is to get an accurate set of measurements. So I was very careful with these students to say, I need to measure you. Are you okay with me getting up close and personal and touching you? I'll touch you as little as I have to, but I'm going to need to pull the tape measure around parts of your body to get measurements. If you would rather do it yourself, that's fine. Neither of these students had a problem, but we did talk about it in class. And again, I think if you're in any kind of situation like that, if you think that you might not want the instructor to get up close and personal with you like that in a class, by all means, I would appreciate it. If I were the teacher and I had a student like that in my class, come and talk to me before the class. Just come up and say, I'm not comfortable with this. Can we find an alternative? Teachers appreciate that heads up before the class so that we know what to expect as well as what the student knows to expect. There's also the issue of commenting on people's body shapes. And what I tell my students is we all have figure features. I don't call them figure flaws. They're figure features, and some features we want to emphasize and some features we want to minimize. There's nothing wrong with your body. It's just a matter of finding the most flattering silhouette and making the size that's appropriate for you, that makes you look as good as you possibly can when you put on that garment. Believe me, if I started cataloging my figure flaws, we'd be here for 2 hours. I have to do full bust adjustments. I have to lengthen the rise of my pants. These are all things that I have to do, and it's just associate any kind of judgment with it. I really did enjoy teaching my Natalie Cowell class on Wednesday. That's a J-Lee pattern, and I'll put the link to it in the show notes. Both of my students decided to make just a similar to the one that I made for the store sample, which was, it had the cowl neck, but I didn't add any grommets or ties. I did not put the band on the bottom. I did have another sample that I brought with me where I did do a band on the bottom, but I hemmed the one that I used for my primary class sample, and my two students decided that they also wanted to hem theirs. None of us put pockets on ours. I'm just not a pocket person. I know that women are really, they really love pockets, and they want dresses with pockets and tunics with pockets, and I'm just not a pocket person. So I didn't put the kangaroo pocket on mine. If I make this again in the future, I might try putting some pockets on the side seams or just one pocket, but even then, I'm not sure I'm going to do that either. Both students had to grade their pattern from one size to another, so that was helpful. I got to illustrate how to use a dressmaker's curve to smooth out those transitions, and when we finished the class, both of the students had very flattering tops that fit them beautifully. So I was really happy. They were really happy, and it was a good class. Once again, I did not get a lot of sewing done this week. It was a busy week for me. I had a doctor's appointment. I had and a couple other appointments. I taught a class all day on Wednesday. I was out running errands and getting chicken feed and picking up the new floor mats for my new Jeep. I finally did get some time in my sewing room late yesterday afternoon, and I worked on a couple of t-shirts for some very special little boys in my life. I don't have any grandchildren yet, but my best friend Susan, who lives up the road from me, we have 4 girls between us that span 9 years, and they're stair-step. So her oldest, then my oldest, then her second, then my second. And I refer to her as my kid's other mother because my kids spent as much time with her when they were growing up as they did with me. And her older daughter has 2 little boys. And I've been collecting knit fabric with construction equipment on it and fire engines and tools and all those things that little boys love. And I made them matching shirts. So I worked on those yesterday afternoon. They're each going to get 2 shirts. One is going to be dark blue or royal blue with construction equipment on it, and the other one is white with fire engines. And yes, white shirts with little boys is not a good combination, but I like the fabric. And when I make things, they're meant to be used. I started a Clumhouse Portsmouth tote a couple of weeks ago, and it has stalled. It stalled because the tension assembly on my Necky BV industrial sewing machine broke. I ordered a new tension stud for the machine. I ordered the Singer 31-15 tension stud. Unfortunately, it doesn't fit. My husband said, "Can you get another tension stud from a donor machine?" And I said, well, I could, but donor machines for that particular model are few and far between. I did find one on eBay and I ordered it, so it's supposed to come next week, and we'll find out if I can resurrect this machine. If not, I might be finishing the Portsmouth tote on a different machine. For now, it's sitting in timeout, and we'll have to wait until I can get an operational machine to finish it. I don't know about you, but when things get a little too chaotic in my sewing room and when I have too many unfinished projects hanging around, I get a little twitchy, and then I find that I have trouble doing anything. So I decided that this morning, was going to be a finish it up day, and I'm trying to tie up as many loose ends with my projects as I can. I have some quilt sandwiches made up for making pot holders. I belong to a craft co-op, and we have a sale every September, and I buy remnants, kind of food-related remnants, on the Joann remnant rack, and I sandwich them with some Insulbright and some leftover pieces of batting and a backing piece, and I just do an all-over loopy or meander quilting on it, and then I cut them into 9.5 inch by 9.5 inch pot holders. I quilted a couple of quilt sandwiches this morning and cut up the pot holders, and now I've got a stack of pot holders that are waiting for binding, so that's going to happen on another finish it up day. I also have some Nantucket mini charm pouches to put together. So the Nantucket mini charm pouch is a free pattern from Moda. If you go to the Moda website and search on that, and I'll try and put a link for this in the show notes, it's a little boxy zipper pouch that's made with one of those little 2.5 inch charm packs. And I had a bunch of those in my stash in my pre-cuts. And what I did over Thanksgiving when I went to Seattle to visit my daughters was I took a sewing machine with me and I set it up in my Airbnb. And when I wasn't out doing stuff, I sewed those little charm packs together. And the Nantucket mini charm pouch has a couple of variations. So you can use 40 of the 42 charms, or you can use half of them, or you can use just one series of them and fill in with a solid color fabric or some other fabric. And I had these that I sewed together, the 40 patch pieces, and so now I'm in the process of also layering those with some foam and a backing and quilting those so that I can finish those and turn them into zipper pouches. And those will probably go into the sale as well. I organized my fabric. I organized my patterns. I'm trying to clear the decks and not succumb to startitis and start any new projects. I have enough current projects and projects in progress that I just need to buckle down and finish the ones that I've started before I start anything else. Back to sewing for the little boys, I also want to mention that Peekaboo Patterns just released their kids' rain pants pattern, and I bought that one because rain pants around here would be exceptionally useful. So at some point I will probably make the boys a couple of pairs of those so they can splash around and get dirty. I've mostly put away my winter fabrics and my sweater knits. As much as I love them, I really need to start making some warmer weather clothing, and I've got a blouse pattern that I've kind of Franken patterned from a couple of different patterns and adjusted bust darts and moved some things around, and I need to start making some variations of that to wear for the summer. I also want to make a couple of dresses. Some linen dresses would be really comfortable. I've got the French Dart Shift pattern and also the Varda dress pattern, and I hope to get to making some of those before too long. So that's what I've been sewing. This is just a weird time of the year. This happens every year. I get all discombobulated going from my winter schedule to my summer schedule. Things will settle down eventually, but it's a rough couple of weeks while it's happening. I've also been working on some podcast stuff behind the scenes. I like to plan ahead, and I want to keep bringing in interviews with interesting people to you. So I've been working on scheduling some of those. Some of them happen soon after I contact the potential guests. Some of them I might record but not release for a couple of weeks. And some of them I've scheduled for a few weeks out into the future. But I always try to keep something moving in that direction so that if there's a week where I don't have a lot to talk about, I've got an interview that I can post. And I'm also thinking about some other things that I could do with the podcast. So if you have feedback, if you have questions, email me at janet@janetzabo.com. If you know of interesting people who might make good guests, by all means, send them in my direction or let me know and I can contact them. I might, at some point in the not too distant future, have to hire somebody to help me with social media. I did a blog post about this a couple of days ago that I called Feeding the Social Media Monster. And it's because a lot of different content creators that I kind of hang out with, and not only in the sewing space, but in other areas of discussion, we're all feeling the same thing. We're all feeling the need to keep up a social media presence, but when you do that, that takes away time from creative activities. Even though some people find social media to be very creative, I don't. And I particularly don't get along very well with Instagram. For some reason, I don't know whether it's because I have a couple of different Instagram accounts or what, but whenever I go to log into Instagram or even to just look at Instagram, it seems to think that I'm a bot, and it makes me go through this very annoying and lengthy verification process. So I tend not to look at Instagram very often because I don't want to spend my time doing that. I also don't like working on my phone. It's small. I have old eyes. It's hard for me to see. I try to do Instagram on my desktop computer, and there is a plugin for Safari, a developer plugin that you can use to make your computer think that it's an iPhone. And so I can get into Instagram and post that way, but I know I'm not getting all of the features that I would if I were doing it on my phone. So I might have to hire somebody younger than me to show me what I need to do. I'm a bit envious of those content creators who have large families or employees, and some of those family members or employees have those skills. So Sherry McConnell has her son Billy to help her do the video editing, and her daughter Chelsea, who works with her on fabric design. When I interviewed Kate McIver last week at the Confident Stitch, one of her employees has some theater experience, so she knows how to do shorts and reels on Instagram. I don't have any of that background, so it's kind of tough for me to go up that learning curve. And I joked with my husband that we should have had a couple more kids, and then maybe I wouldn't have this problem. I am still working on it. It's a process. I don't like it when it takes away time from the creative things that I'm doing, because if you spend all your time doing social media, when do you have time to create content? If you follow Johanna Lundstrom and Milena Hierpe's podcast called Stitch and Tales, it's on YouTube. You can search for it. They also did a podcast episode this week talking about marketing and social media, and they're feeling some of the same things that I am. So it's one of those things that I think we all wrestle with. I heard a statistic the other day that there are people who spend 90 minutes a day scrolling through social media, and all I can think to myself is I could spend that 90 minutes doing so much more productive things. So if that's you and that's your choice on how to spend your time, that's fine. But I can't produce if I'm spending all my time on social media. So there endeth that sermon. I'm going to address a couple of listener questions that I got. So I got an email from Lois, and she asked where to get PDF patterns printed. This is a great question. I'm going to show my age again. I'm going to tell you a little story. So back when I started my knitting newsletter back in 2000, it was print only. I laid it out and I printed out a master copy, and I took it to a local printer, and they printed hard copies for me, which I put in envelopes and put stamps on, or I took it to a bulk mailing facility and I mailed those out through snail mail. And maybe 3 or 4 years into that, I started getting requests from people to offer PDF downloads. And I had no idea what was involved with making digital downloads. That was the point at which I had to start learning how to code a website, because drag and drop websites weren't a thing then. You had to do it in either a program like Go Live or Dreamweaver or hand code. You had to learn CSS, cascading style sheets. You had to have a credit card account that you had to implement on the back end of your website, and you had to do all of this compliance work. All of that is now done for you with most hosts, most website hosts, but there was a period of time where I had to learn how to do all of that. I had to do a lot of hand holding for people when they tried to download things and things wouldn't show up for them. Now things, if you buy a PDF pattern or a PDF file, the download process goes much more smoothly. But that wasn't the case back in the dark ages of digital downloads. So now we have PDF files, and when you purchase a PDF file, they usually come one of a couple of different ways. So when you purchase a pattern online, you'll get usually a package of files, and one of those files might be the instructions. Another file might be for printing at home, and that's where you would print it at home on your laser printer or inkjet printer, and you would tape the pieces of paper together to make a large sheet of paper, and then you could either cut that out as your pattern or trace it. You can also get print shop files, and those are the ones that I typically get. I usually get the print shop files. They're sometimes called A0 files, and I put them on a thumb drive and I take them to the copy shop in town that does blueprints. They have a large format printer. They actually have a couple of large format printers. It's where my husband gets blueprints printed if he's working on a house foundation. I give them my thumb drive. They plug it into their computer. They open up the file and they can print it. I can get it printed in either color or black and white. If the file comes in color, sometimes the designer will color code each size in a different color. That's a little bit more expensive than getting it printed in black and white. I usually opt for black and white. You can also have the copy shop print what are called layers. When a designer puts a pattern file together, they can put each size on what's called a layer. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a layer that has only that size on it. So if you know, for example, that you're only going to be making a size 10 and you don't need to make any pattern adjustments or grade out to a different size, you can ask the printing place to print just the layer for the size 10 pattern. And that way you don't have all of the competing lines to deal with. Some pattern companies will offer PDF printing as part of your pattern purchase. So when you buy the pattern, you can specify to have it printed and mailed to you. And there's an additional charge for that, but it saves you from having to download the file, put it on a thumb drive, take it to the printing place, and have them print it. There are also online PDF printers. These are independent places that aren't associated with any specific designer. And again, you can Google this and you can upload your file to them. They'll print it and they'll mail it to you. The cost varies. I can tell you that the blueprint place where I take my patterns will do one page at about $6 for a black and white print. And typically the patterns that I buy are maybe 1 or 2 pages. If you get something really complicated like the Laundry Day Tea or some of the Love Notions patterns that might have 5 or 6 pages, it'll cost you a little bit. But again, you can choose which pages you want printed. So if you don't need all of the pages, you don't have to have those printed. So hopefully that'll give you some more information about getting your patterns printed. Almost every Staples that I've ever been into will do that kind of printing. I take it to the blueprint place just because it's a small business in town and I want to support them. My other listener question comes from REK12, and REK12 asks, do I have a system that I recommend for organizing my sewing projects? No, that's the short answer. I'm very bad at this. I tend to carry things around in my head, and the older I get, the less clean hard drive space I have up there. I'm trying to develop some kind of a system. For my quilts, what I decided to do was something that I modeled on the system that my husband uses for when he's juggling multiple jobs. He has a whiteboard in his office, and it's divided into 4 sections. So he has the sections labeled bidded, in process, finished. I think there's one other category. And he moves the projects from category to category as he gets them going through the pipeline. So for my big quilt projects, I try to do that and it works reasonably well. I don't use a whiteboard. I actually keep things in a notebook. For my garment projects, I'm still trying to find something that works. Usually I try to not let my garment projects languish too long. So if I start something on Monday, I try to have it done within a few days. Otherwise, it ends up sinking to the bottom of a pile, and I have to wait until it floats to the top of the pile again. I do keep all of my fabrics in plastic bins, labeled and organized. I live in a place where there is a lot of dust. There's dust because my husband does concrete for a living and he brings a lot of dirt in the house. We have animals. We have chickens. I do a lot of gardening and farming. So there's always dirt floating around. We also get wildfires in the summer, and I don't have air conditioning in my house, so a lot of times the windows are open and that ash floats in, and then it just sort of recirculates throughout the house. I did buy an industrial air scrubber a couple of years ago when the ash got really bad, and that helps. I have to clean periodically and stir up all of the dust so that the air scrubber can suck it out of the air into a filter. But I still don't like to leave things out. I don't ever leave thread out. I don't leave fabric out because within a couple of weeks it will get a layer of dust on it. I keep as many of my supplies in labeled plastic bins on a shelf in my sewing room as I can, because I also don't like to spend hours and hours looking for things that I know I have, which I did this week. When I was working on the little boys' t-shirts, I needed some black knit ribbing, and I know I have black knit ribbing because I buy it when it's on the remnant rack at Joann's. But could I find that bin of black knit ribbing? No, I could not. And I looked and I looked and I went through all of my bins and I found the white knit ribbing, but I could not find the black knit ribbing. And then one day this week, I walked into my sewing room and I picked up a pile of fabric, and lo and behold, underneath was the black knit ribbing. It wasn't in its box. So I do try to keep things labeled and put away because I get very frustrated when I spend hours and hours looking for things that I know I have. There are some formal types of planners out there. I know Sherry McConnell has a quilting planner. Lori Holt has a quilting planner. There are various kinds that you can get at Staples or at other office supply stores. I use just a notebook with some gridded, 1/4-inch gridded paper in it. I combine that with labeled dividers, and that seems to work reasonably well for me. I did recently hear about a new app that's coming out. It's called Backstitch. Right now, it's in beta testing, and you do have to sign up to be a beta tester. I signed up, and I haven't heard yet whether I'm close to the top of the beta testing list. There is a waiting list. But it promises to be something like Ravelry. If you are a knitter or crocheter and you're familiar with Ravelry, this is something along those same lines, but for stitchers. I'm eager to see how it's set up, and if they eventually get a phone or a tablet-based app, I think that'll be great too. So keep your eye out and keep your ears out for a program called Backstitch. I think I'm going to end this episode here. I've talked for a bit. It's been a lot of miscellaneous, but there were a lot of little things that I needed to talk about. As always, if you would go to iTunes or to Spotify and leave a rating or a review, I would appreciate it. It helps other people to find the podcast. If you have any suggestions, feedback, complaints, constructive criticism, I'll take it all. You can email me at janet@janetzabo.com. My website is at www.janetzabo.com, and that links to my Big Sky Knitting Designs website and to the website for the podcast. The website for the podcast, if you want to go directly to the episode show notes, is www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. I appreciate everybody who's left a review so far. I love the emails that I get. I've gotten some great suggestions about patterns. I've gotten a lot of good questions. So if you have other questions, send them in. We'll have another listener question episode. I'm trying to bring you the sewing content that I like to listen to on podcasts. But if there's something that you'd like to hear about that I haven't discussed, by all means, let me know, and I will do my best to try and meet those needs. So until next time, I hope you have a great week and you get to go sew something.